Hello, and welcome to Rough Edges. I'm your host, Sarah Fox. In this podcast, I will guide you through my faith and mental health journey to dispel the stigma surrounding mental illness and to create a voice for those who wish to discover more about these topics. This podcast will not only shed light on mental health issues, but will also reveal the intersection between faith and mental illness. I pray that these themes will bring growth and healing to our communities. Hello, everyone. I want to extend a warm welcome to the introductory episode of Rough Edges. In this episode, I will give a brief introduction into how I started this podcast, how the title came about, and I'll also share a poem that aligns with the theme of this podcast. Today, I want to start off by introducing myself. My name is Sarah Fox, and I'm a recent graduate of the King's College with a bachelor's in politics, philosophy, and economics. I know, that's a mouthful. I'm currently working as an assistant community manager, and I aspire to be a real estate attorney while doing juvenile justice pro bono. I'm a huge nerd who loves comics, especially from Marvel. Sorry, DC fans. My favorite characters include T'Challa, or Black Panther, Captain America, Spider-Man, and Deadpool. The only DC character that I really love is Batman. I got into superheroes because of my mom's love for them. As a kid, I grew up watching movies like Iron Man, The Dark Knight, Captain America the Winter Soldier, and many more because my mom loved them so much. She always watched the movies on TV, and you know how you just happen to watch things that your parents watch? Like you step in the room and end up watching whatever's on the TV at the time? Well, whenever she had the movies on, I would be glued to the television screen. To me, all of these characters represent tenacity and the unwillingness to let pain keep you from fulfilling your destiny. These heroes taught me that resilience is essential for moving forward in life, and I'm grateful that these stories shaped my view of determination and the relentless nature of pushing through pain. I'm also an unapologetic Twilight fan who loves the movies, not just for vampirism or Robert Pattinson, although those things are definitely a plus, but for the messages of love that stem from those stories. I also love to write poetry. I perform some of my poems for outreaches with my church, for strangers in an Uber, and for teens at a youth event in Manhattan. So let me talk about performing for strangers in an Uber. So one night, my friend and I, we went to a poetry slam, and we shared a ride with this couple. And they asked us if we liked poetry, and of course my friend had to bring up the fact that I write and perform my own poems. So when she did that, they asked me to share a poem. So I was able to share one of my poems called Healing Takes Time. And they loved it. Like, I was shocked by how impressed they were with the poems. Like, even the driver, he was just, like, in awe of it. So, yeah, I performed one of my poems for strangers in an Uber, and it was amazing. Aside from poetry, I also write articles. I manage my own self-titled blog that would be called Sarah I. Fox, where I write about my faith, culture, racial justice, singleness, and womanhood. I'm also a frequent contributor to this blog called Iridescent Women. It's a platform by women and for women that covers topics such as beauty and wellness, culture, faith, and relationships. I submitted my first article about racial injustice, and I was amazed by the impact that it had in people's lives. It even made the top 10 articles of the year last year. It's called A Prayer for Racial Acceptance and Advocacy. I'll read a little excerpt from the article. Dear God, I don't even know where to begin with this prayer. Over the past few weeks, there have been multiple murders caused by police brutality and deep-seated racism. The most recent incident was a murder of George Floyd. George Floyd was killed by former officer Derek Chauvin, who pressed his knee on the back of Floyd's neck. As George cried out for help and told the officer that he couldn't breathe, his pleas were ignored as Chauvin kept his knee in place. Chauvin also stayed on Floyd's neck for an extra 3 minutes after he died. Lord, I'm so pissed off right now. I'm so filled with rage because of this kind of brutality. It has been going on in America for centuries. Even now, I struggle to fully accept my racial identity because I often believe the lie that my worth is dictated by my skin tone. Although I sometimes question my worth, I'm reminded that my identity in Christ is greater than my blackness. I highly suggest that you check out the rest of this article, not because I wrote it, but because it talks about themes of racial injustice and also how faith can be the bridge that takes us to fully accepting those who have different skin tones and who look different or come from a different cultural background than we do. You can read the full version on iridescentwomen.com. Initially, I was so nervous about publishing it on a big platform, but I'm glad that it made such an impression on my friends, family members, former professors, and peers. I'm also an editor for Iridescent Women, and I love to read various articles from such dynamic women. It's truly an honor to serve such a wonderful ministry. Aside from writing, I'm also interested in becoming a mental health advocate, especially for those who are afraid to speak out or for those who want to know how to support someone with mental illness. This desire stems from my own experiences with mental illness and seeing others take a stand for initiating more conversations about mental health. Am I a mental health expert? Absolutely not. But I want to shed light on these issues, especially concerning the church and its role in the intersection between faith and mental health. So, why start a podcast? All right, let's be honest. Starting a podcast wasn't always part of the plan. Aside from a few friends telling me that I should start one, I never really had a desire to start a podcast, especially since most people already had one, and I hate hearing my own voice on recordings. I always tell myself, how do I even have friends who want to listen to this voice all day? Anyway, after listening to podcasts from other mental health activists, close friends, and other artists who inspire me, I decided, why not start a podcast? Why not start a podcast which specifically marries faith and mental health? Why not explore how these things can work together for further growth and healing? So, here we are. This podcast also serves as a tool to help me navigate my own mental health journey. I was diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder in January of this year. Around New Year's Eve, I had 3 severe episodes. I had an anxiety attack, a depressive episode, and a manic attack, which led me to be hospitalized on January 4th. I remember when I first received my diagnosis. My heart dropped when I found out that I had bipolar disorder. I remember one of the nurses in the hospital handing me a packet. I was devastated when I saw the words bipolar disorder in bold on the cover page. I couldn't finish reading the packet before the tears came down my cheeks. Finding an appropriate treatment plan also wasn't easy. I had to make several adjustments to my treatment team and my medication plan. Although I'm doing much better than I was before, there are still some areas of bipolar disorder that I need to learn more about. I also want this podcast to be a resource for those who want to know what to expect and how to manage mental illness. Again, I am by no means an expert on these topics, but I would like to create a safe space for those who want to speak out or explore more about these issues. So, what's the meaning behind the name Rough Edges? When you think about the phrase rough edges, what are three things that come to mind? For me, when I think of rough edges, I think about something sharp or jagged. I also think about imperfections or something that isn't smooth to the touch. Having a rough edge indicates that something is broken and that needs to be properly mended. So, why call the podcast Rough Edges? The name Rough Edges comes from my own battle with mental illness. I'll go into more detail in future episodes, but for me, the journey was rough. This title also comes from the realization that we're all rough around the edges in our own ways. Just because we have rough edges doesn't mean that we can't or shouldn't receive love. I also want to change the stigma attached to many of us who may be rougher around the edges than others. I'm hoping to use this title as a symbol of hope for all who listen and to offer the unconditional love that Christ has for us. Stay tuned to hear my poem. Rough edges. Every day it's hard to get a grip. I'm trying to walk in a steady pace, but all I do is trip. I can't seem to get my focus. Too many thoughts running through my mind. When the tidal waves of emotional pain hit me, all I do is say, I'm fine. Rough edges. They never seem to fade. All these jagged edges, that's just how I'm made. Come and see these messy lines, you'll never be the same. Bumps and bruises are my bread and butter. Talking to another person sends my heart aflutter. One day I'm in a pleasant mood, the next I'd rather sit and brood. These sharp edges cut to my core. I wonder if I can take it anymore. Rough edges, they never seem to fade. All these jagged edges, that's just how I'm made. Come and see these messy lines, you'll never be the same. Each day gets easier, each day gets brighter. Although the spaces get a little tighter, I know that this burden will get lighter. God's got my rough edges in his hands. I know that this trial is all part of the plan. Someday, these edges will fade away. Healing will give hope for a brighter day. Rough edges, they all will fade away. All these jagged edges, the Creator is making a way. Come and see these messy lines. They all will heal with time. I wrote this poem on September 11th, 2021, after a conversation with a close friend of mine. I actually wrote this on the bus stop on my way to work. Whenever inspiration strikes, you just have to write it down. My friend encouraged me that it may be hard to push through these rough times, but I have to remember that God is with me and that He is taking care of my rough edges and my journey with mental health. I also learned while writing this poem that your edges are what make you, you. It's not a burden or a curse. It's part of human nature. Although I sometimes feel down, I know that there is hope for healing and change. And I pray that you will find the hope for healing and change as well in your own life. Thank you so much for listening to that poem. Thank you for listening to Rough Edges. Feel free to follow me on Instagram at Sarah I. Fox or visit my blog at sarahifox.com. If you have any questions or further suggestions for how this podcast can grow, you can email at rough.edges.podcast@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening and have a wonderful day.